Olá, muito boa tarde a todas e a todos que nos acompanham nessa tarde final da nossa 21ª edição do International Accounting Conference, da 18ª edição do Congresso de Contabilidade e Iniciação Científica da Universidade de São Paulo. Sejam muito bem-vindos. Nessa tarde nós teremos a apresentação do professor Dr. Shahzad Uddin about Reflexive Deliberations of Family Directors on Corporate Board Reforms, publicly listed family firms in emerging economies. Professor Uddin is a professor of accounting, the director of Essex Account Center. He's also the editor of the Journal of Accounting Emerging Economies. He has published on management accounting, accounting development, public management, corporate governance, and CSR, questioning the role of the global politics in emerging economies. In addition, he has published 4 books on accounting development topics: the Handbook of Accounting Development, published in 2012, the Research in Accounting in Emerging Economies, 2010, Accounting in Emerging Economies, 2009, and Corporate Governance in Less Developed and Emerging Economies, 2008. Furthermore, some of his most cited articles are on these topics as well, such as Management Account in Less Developed Countries, What is Known and Needs Knowing, Bangladesh soap opera, privatization, account regime of control in a less developed country, account privatization claims and rationality, traditionalism, and the corporate governance mechanism from a less developed country. In modern presentation, we invited Professor Fabio Frezatti. Professor Fabio is a professor in the Actuarial Science Department since 1997 and the director of the School of Economics, Business and Accounting of the University of São Paulo since 2018. He graduated in Business Administration, Master in Business Administration, and PhD in Accounting Controllership, all from the University of São Paulo. He also served in a postdoctoral position at the University of Illinois in 2000. Professor Fabio previously worked as a financial executive for several companies, playing roles in executive positions, mainly multinational. Serves as an administrative director and he research director at FIPECAF. Professor Uddin, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Fabio and Dr. Eduardo, for inviting me to this conference. I'm really honored and pleased to be able to speak to you guys, and this is also on the topic that I'm interested to speak. Thank you very much for inviting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the screen to start my presentation. I hope that you can see my slides.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, right, okay, so this is the topic of corporate governance and family business. I've been working on this area for quite a long time now. And this particular paper is from my PhD student, Shaila Ahmed's PhD thesis. So this is quite, we've been working on this project for now 4 to 5 years. And this is, I think, is one of the important paper that we have been working on, especially in this field. As you know, that corporate governance field is pretty much dominated by quantitative tradition. So we are trying to bring something sort of original from the perspective of qualitative perspective. So one of the important issues, I think you already know that the family farms is an important and key area of development. So contributing to the global economic growth. So this is perhaps one of the reasons we're interested in corporate governance in the family farms. But this is not family farms that which are not. This is the family farms we're interested in, which are stock exchange listed. So therefore, when a family firm are stock exchange listed, they are subject to corporate governance regulations. And And so various kinds of reforms have been proposed to perhaps to address those scandals that we see in family farms or family-dominated farms. The problem with these scandals, and so we have scandals, new corporate governance reforms, then other scandals, another set of reforms. So it's keep coming back at the same issues. So we wanted to sort of see, okay, so what is it that the policymakers not getting? What is it that they are not really realizing what is happening in family PLCs? So when you look at this literature, we can see that the family farms or family-dominated boards are typically exposed to a number of conflicts and family altruism, socio-emotional attachment, secrecy, so all kinds of things that we find from the literature that family farm are addressing. And most of the studies are looking at kind of a input-output relationship, but very little on the key players of any family PLCs, which are family directors. So basically, what we wanted to see that how family directors respond to the reforms keep coming back to them, and how we can understand the lived experience of these family directors to the regulatory demands. So we seem to think that this is one of the issues that have not been addressed well in the literature. If you look at the literature of board reforms and corporate governance areas, then we probably see that all the reforms are targeted to address principal agent conflict. And we already know in the family business, this conflict is a little bit different, isn't it? There's more kind of principal conflict. So from the beginning, this attempt of standardization of corporate governance is you can see is probably going to fail, but we keep having those kind of reforms. If you look at the literature of corporate governance in family farms, and we can see that there is a number of informal and formal structure in those family farms, like family council, special committee, family chart, internal code of conduct and ethics. So all kinds of things is already in the literature. So which make it so different from, say, multinational PLC. And also literature suggested that there is an issues of socio-emotional wealth invested in family PLC. So there is an issues of formal and informal structure within family PLC. So this is irrespective of where this family farms is located, developed or emerging economy, everywhere. So these kind of issues are common in family PLC. However, if you then see the issues of family governance in non-Western context, when I say non-Western, I actually probably should say in non-Anglo-American context, we can always see this family governance is beset with underdeveloped institutions, and there's a number of histories or priorities that are involved with these family farms. So the point is that we're trying to say here that family PLCs are significantly different in terms of their structure, in terms of the internal control mechanisms, in terms of their conflict they face. So therefore, any reforms are being addressed, are thrown at them, they would respond differently. So for instance, previous studies have studied these responses to reforms. For example, Jandron studies looked at how these reforms are met with superficial compliance. Papers talked about how there is cynical adoption structure decoupled from practice, and sometimes overstatement of compliance that we see. So you basically are forcing these family PLCs to comply something, so they either superficially comply or over comply. So our study is really looking at why and how the directors resist or superficially comply or over comply in the family governance settings. Because this why question and how question is, I think, poorly understood. I think the reason it's poorly understood is because of there's lack of theoretical and methodological directions of corporate governance research. So this is where our paper is, we hope to contribute, to bring this new theoretical and methodological ideas to corporate governance researchers who are interested in deeper studies of directors' response, family directors' response. So what we're saying that the family-dominated board, when I say family-dominated board, we're really talking about a board which is controlled by one or two individuals, either brothers or father and brothers and things like that. Is often a battleground for multiple and diverse interest. Now you can say that is same as other multinational PLC. I would say no. It's simply because these family directors, they may have economic interest, which is usual to have, because if you own 50% of the business, you like to keep this business going. But they also have non-economic interest. So those kind of diverse interests you probably do not see in a same multinational PLC. So that's why we need to understand these agencies of family directors. One of the purpose of corporate governance reforms we can see is that they want to make the board more independent. Now the question really is that why the powerful family directors allow independent board members to work? What is it in their interest? The answer is they probably wouldn't. Why then, the question we can then again ask, why even independent board members would be hungry or would like to maintain high professional standard in a context where they are treated mere outsider, and these family elites which control this family PLC reserve pervasive power both within and outside the firm. So for us, these are the important questions we need to understand to explain why reforms sometimes work in certain contexts and sometimes they don't work in other contexts. And from that perspective, we are saying that we need to understand the concerns of these family directors. So concerns of agents, individually and also as collectively as a family, is important for us. And from that point of view, I think we need to theorize this concern of these agents. To understand their response, we need to understand the lived experience to understand how actually they should or they respond to the corporate governance reforms. So the question now is how we theorize these concerns of family directors, to theorize this concern of agents. Now, obviously, we're not the first in the scene. We have agency theory that already gave us some fundamental ideas how you theorize the concerns of agency or agent. So from there, the agency theory's fundamental focus is material interest, economic interest. So the whole notion of principal agent conflict based on the economic interest, self-interest, economic interest, or I could call material interest. So this has been studied many corporate governance, studies looked at this agency theory stuff to understand these concerns of the agents. But also the number of, I'm sure the family governance researcher have seen these other theories like socio-emotional wealth theory, familyness, stewardship theory, social capital theory, resource-based theory, all kinds of theory. But those theories also focus on non-material interest. So meaning the non-economic interest of agents, in this case, family directors. Our criticism to this theory is that none of those theories is focused at the level of, deeper level of agency. That is essential concerns, life projects of the actors, for instance. So we wanted to know, okay, what is the life projects of family directors to understand how they respond to the reforms. We can immediately say, oh, they respond negatively because they don't want to lose control of the family of this business, or they don't want to lose control of the board, which is, I think, is easy way to theorize it. But we are saying it's much more than that. We're saying that it's not just the economic interest, it's more than economic interest, that why these family directors respond the way they respond to the reforms. So basically we're saying deeper focus on the variety and the origin of agential concerns are critical in shedding light on how those concerns are negotiated and fed into resistance individually and collectively in a situated setting. So in our case, is basically how these family directors resist, why they resist, how they resist to the reforms. We need to look at the origin of their concern. So we believe that that will help us to explain why the same regulatory pressure works in one context, but appears to meet resistance in another one. Okay, so we are introducing here is the different theoretical position and what we call reflexivity. So reflectives as a notion introduced by Margaret Archer, as a sociologist. What she is trying to tell us that reflexivity will be able to tell you how the agents form their concerns, how agents take the actions, the way they take actions. So for her to understand the reflexivity, you need to understand the interplay between people's immediate concern, primary concern, and the context they're coming from. So this is the sort of kind of main point of her. So put it simply, different individual will be occupying different position in a given setting. So say in a corporate firms or non-corporate firms, they will act perhaps differently, even in the same structural situation, because of their different kind of reflexivity that emerges. So theoretically, this means that the same regulatory change may be constituted and implemented quite differently depending on the dialectical interplay of context, is the setting these people are from, and the concerns of agents, their personal concerns. So for us to gain sort of explanatory purchase of the diverse essential reactions and deliberation, it is for us important to understand the emerging power of reflexivity. So basically we're saying, look, if you wish to study how family directors respond, go and try to understand what is the reflexivity, what kind of reflexivity do they have, what kind of life projects do they have, what kind of context they're coming from. So this requires a kind of in-depth study. So in another way, we are trying to say that to understand the concerns of agents, we need to understand the inner conversation they're having. So these people, these key people, family directors, in our case, we need to find their inner conversation. It's not easy. From the epistemological point of view, is a very challenging one to find inner conversation of someone else. So we propose life story interviews that researcher will be spend a long time with the following few individuals and then try to understand what is their primary concerns. Are they happy with their current contextual situation? Do they want continuity? Do they want discontinuity, for instance? Or what kind of priorities do they have? What kind of concerns do they have professionally, personally, in every aspect of their life? So for that reason, we carried out a life story interview of a key family director to see how they understand their situation in the context of reforms. We've also interviewed a number of other people, other family directors. So for us, as a researcher, that we need to doing these interviews, doing this life story interview or semi-structured interview, documentations, newspaper story about the individuals. So that we have to sort of come to a conclusion as a researcher, case by case basis, what kind of reflexive patterns this particular family directors might have. So for us, that will give us an indication why, how they respond to the reforms. So in a sense, you're going into the deeper understanding of agency. So we are not saying that all agents, of course you wouldn't, all families will behave exactly the same way. We're not saying absolutely not. So we're saying that they would probably behave differently, depending on their concerns, depending on their priorities, and also depending on the context they're in. So let's focus on the this is a summary of the empirical story, empirical findings. In the paper, we have obviously a lot of stuff in there, but I just wanted to give you sort of a summary of these empirics. So basically, when I talk about reforms in these cases, the reforms mainly is about how to reform the corporate board, how to make them accountable, formal, and professional, because these are family PLCs. So there are shareholders outside. They're minority shareholders, and family owners are controlling the company. So the corporate governance regulations is about make these companies, family PLCs, more formal, more accountable, more professional. That's number one kind of thing they wanted to achieve. Second thing they wanted to achieve is the independent oversight. They wanted to, inject independent directors. I mean, this is not a new story in a sense. Every country's, everywhere, this is that we see this kind of reforms coming through. So they wanted to make this family PLC more professional. They wanted to make this family PLC more transparent to the minority shareholders who are not in the board, which is, I think, a reasonable expectation. But what we ended up doing, there are a lot of other details how they want to do, but I'm just focusing on these two particular reforms of the board. What actually ended up that, of course, the directors, the family directors didn't allow that to happen. So the way they wanted to achieve this is they became even more protective of their firms. Although their family PLC say they have to give some leeway to this, the regulations, but they wanted to achieve more maintenance of close family control. And one of the mechanism, I think the people who work in the family business, who does research in the family, they already know this. One of they do this is through the executive committee. So it's often informal in nature. So this executive committee is not very transparent to the board of directors. So this is kind of either family members or their kins are part of this family executive committee. We also found these companies to start having their own code of conduct. So in response to the external code of conduct, they started to having their own code of conduct so that they can maintain this close family control. So they wanted to become even more close because the regulatory pressure is coming from outside. And also they have resisted by providing counter narratives to the regulatory bodies. For example, family directors saying, real world business is different. You have to think of cost and benefit in each step. And one family director saying, we have to be cautious. You can never know what information they are taking out into the market. At worst, perhaps he or she is sitting on our competitors' board. So this is about that secrecy, the secrets being out, and this isn't good for the business. So, and also they're saying these independent directors are not coming with the shareholders' mandate. So they have, family directors have the shareholders' mandate because they own, say, for instance, 49 or 48% of the shares. But independent directors are not. So independent directors are seen as someone outsider, someone should not know about the business. So this kind of counter narratives they're pushing in the broader discourse. They also have started to lobby so that this independent oversight have less intervention into their activities. So I don't, looking at the time, so there's a number of ways that they managed to do that in this case. But what we like to know, what we like to argue that why these people are resisting the way they did. So this is the kind of main primary concern. So during our interviews with these family directors, what we came across using the Archer's idea of reflexivity is that these family directors are self-content, what they have, in a sense that they do not wish to change anything. So this is Archer calls it communicative reflexive. So they want to prioritize the continuity of the context. And the number of reasons why they would like to prioritize it. So this came through our interviews. For example, they're saying we're born into the business, we're going to the business, we're marrying into business. They're talking about borrowing not from the banks, but borrowing from family friends. Remember, this is a family PLC. They could easily go to borrow money from the bank, but they're not doing that. Working with experienced partners, this kind of the wish to continue whatever they have. But at the same time, they have their own kind of personal project, personal concern about the business, about themselves, about their own family. So during this live story interview, for instance, one of the major issue came out is that this particular family director who has established the business, then it became PLCs, but his overarching concern is not to make a loan. So his preference always for the equity. So he doesn't want to make a loan. If he wants to make a loan, he wants to make a loan from the family friends rather than the bank. So this is quite interesting because if we use the typical finance theory, that's often the cheapest in terms of the capital cost. But this particular individual, shareholder, they're not interested. So we have a conversation and telling the family directors, look, bank loan is cheaper than equity. Why you are focusing on the bank? This is not good for the business in a sense. If you use the shareholders' wealth maximization, it doesn't make any sense. But because of his own project, personal project, own religious background, and bitter lesson he learned from previous business failures, so he decided that he's not going to make any loan. So this is a kind of a point we're trying to make here, that the personal projects, life stories, life projects often determine the reflexive patterns of key individual, which then in turn shape how they respond to the reforms. Also, he talked about fear of future nationalization. So becoming a PLC, he felt he was a safer route to avoid being out of business overnight. So he rather likes equity, sharing the risk from the equity point of view. But nevertheless, he had consistently retained control of the business, kept the factories close to his home, and also employed people from his family, from his villages, from the surrounding area. So all this, although this is a family PLC, he is not acting on behalf of the shareholders, other shareholders, he's just acting what he thinks is right for his personal understanding of personal projects. We also interviewed other family directors. They are young directors, and our interviews, for example, with some young directors again suggested the same thing. So they have never conceived of life beyond their current situation. For some, it was difficult, for others, it's not. We talked to second generation directors. For example, one of them said, after CPA, I worked for a few years in the USA, which I never thought of. Now I feel like it wasn't me. I was brought up in a business environment, so it's really hard to keep myself detached from the business. So this second, third generation family directors, they are emotionally involved with the businesses. And although they are not, this is a family PLC, I keep saying that, but they're emotionally, they understand what their father wants from these businesses, and so on and so forth. So that determining their contextual continuity, which they like to continue as a status quo. So other directors say, I'm relatively inexperienced, so before finalizing any major decision, I consult with Mr. R, who is a general manager, who has been with our business from the very beginning. So importance of trust and relationship is quite important for these family directors. So I mentioned about executive committee. So these are the people who are in this executive committee. If they are not a family members, then it must be someone they trust in that executive committee. So for us, it's really suggesting that these people, these family directors, wanted to contextual continuity. They wanted to prioritize their own kind of concerns, their own life projects, and also they wanted to have this trusted relationship. So this what constituted the pattern of reflexivity of this particular set of family directors. And this is what artists call communicative reflexive. But there could well be some other family directors or different kind of life projects and have a different kind of response to the reforms. So because this particular set of family directors are more interested in stability over change, so they wanted to act strategically in order to respond to the reforms. They wanted to preserve family control, they wanted to preserve confidentiality, and they also put a lot of importance to the trust. So they kind of took a non-confrontational route to this regulatory pressure. For example, these lobbies they use to have less kind of intervention, the counter narratives. So all those other informal mechanisms are sort of kind of explain to us how they kind of wanted stability over change. So I know just time is running out, so I'm looking at the contribution now. So what exactly we're doing here? So what we're trying to say that reflexivity as a concept is interesting one. It brings the critical dimension to the corporate governance research. It takes us beyond agency theory. It also takes us beyond other theories. Excuse me. For example, this embodied disposition, the reflexive patterns, helps us to understand why and how they behave in a particular setting. We also think that in order to fully appreciate the emergent tension and how directors actually strategically cope with this intervention, so by looking at, it helps us to look into the lived experience of these family directors. So we're not making a judgment in terms of they are trying to avoid these reforms. We're just looking at why they have resisted and how they have responded. So the lived experience and narratives is quite an important part of any individual. And this idea of reflexive deliberation is quite useful in that sense. So that will help us then to understand why act or resist and why these people take a different kind of position. For instance, why managers within this family PLC don't see themselves as a shareholder's steward, but they see themselves as a family manager. So this is quite an important understanding. And also because of this, they interpret the requirement of board independence as a kind of a passing fad, for instance. They see this as a leakage of secrecy, costly administrative burden. So they don't really buy into these kind of reforms. And this can only be understood if you go and deeper into this life project, lived experience of these family directors. I think we're also telling that had we not taken this reflexive concept, we could have said, yeah, we could have simply said they're resisting because this is what material interest, economic interest, telling them to do. We are saying it is more than that. We are saying that there are more than economic interest in this family director's life project. And that's what I think is the main contribution that one can take from this reflexivity concept. So we're not very basically depicting this family director as a docile, compliant, and economically rational subject. They are often economically non-rational or irrational subject, because the example I gave earlier about debt. So this methodological pluralist approach to agency, I think, is quite useful, especially to understand this family director's action. So I'll stop now, and I'll hand over to Professor Eduardo or Fabio.
Thank you, Professor Uddin. Thank you for coming. Hi, everybody. Professor Uddin come here as a researcher and editor-in-chief of a very important journal, and takes care about an issue that is very important for us. For several years, we have a chance to talk about family business in this Congress, and the more the time is passing by, it's clear that we have some variety of opportunities, heterogeneity of contests and the profile of the company. And congratulations, Professor Uddin, because your paper, first of all, refers to a very relevant issue, very important issue. It's important, and the ontology is not the one that we normally we face. So it's a very interesting contribution for the debate about that. And I have some comments about your presentation, only as a linkage, and people will start to put some questions in the chat. Okay, let's just give this opportunity. Well, when you think about the presentation and you make clear the conflict that we have in the organization, and the word regulatory view versus cynical adoption for me is a gift, because it's clear for us the mind, what you are talking about. Okay, is ceremonial. Yes, it's ceremonial, but it's more than this. Okay, everything changed to change nothing is the things that in Brazil we are aware about. Second thing that I think is interesting when you think about the reflexivity approach, it's interesting because the linkage, if the locus, the main point of research is clear, and if this trade-offs that you have, and in certain moment you don't have trade-offs, you only have you keep I should say the mindset that is the same, but formally you are in a good shape, and it's an important situation. And not only in Bangladesh, for sure, we have I can see companies in Brazil exactly the same situation, despite you mentioned the religion issue as important perspective in some actions, in some and in Brazil, I could say that is a different context, but the similarities are for the situation I could identify. Uh, Other thing that I think that is important. You bring some points to reflections. Uh, for example, when you think about family business, the board of directors and the family there, but more than this, you have the executives in the company, and you have the non-family and families. So if the problem is in the top, it will rebate and the whole the organization. So you are raising opportunities of research in your speech, okay? And uh, the word trust appear in your speech is a thing that's for me. If you want to understand the family business, this word in the context must be understood, because if you don't have this issue, nothing will happen in the environment. And the last word that appear, and I think that is important, is the dilemma of the people in the board. If you think about the passivity, the way that you may behave, well, I'm here only to sign papers or to look you, I say good morning or something like this. That is a reaction or a consequence of the mindset of the people that have power in the company, and what they expect from governments. So thank you very much for your speech, and I think that is very instigative for us. Let's go to the audience, because we have some things. Eduardo, the first one, Eduardo, to all. Congratulations for the presentation, and this approach, this qualitative approach, is not common in our normal situations, and for the accounting literature, and the reasons for the maths is clear for us. Thank you. Thank you. The second, Tassiani, could you read that? Are you reading that? Tassiani,
yeah, I can read it. I can see the question, but some of them I can see. I can sort of look at the question that are given to me in English. I think one question is in Portuguese as well, so I probably need your help to translate that one. So the first question is from Daniel. So question is about, could you please describe in which extent cultural dimensions were considered in your investigation? although generalization might not be the aim of your study, in which extent your findings could be extended, happen. Okay, so I understand what your question is. So look, this particular paper is looking at introducing a meta concept. So it's more like a opposition to agency theory. So how we understand agency, which is in economist, in Jensen and Mackling terms, it will be based on self-interest and material interest or economic interest. So reflexivity is kind of a sociological idea. So culture, so if you try to understand the reflexive patterns of individual in family directors, it could apply to any kind of situation, any kind of context. But if you study if you try to understand the reflexive patterns of individual, then their life story, their life projects will be embedded with their cultural orientation. So for instance, this family directors I talked about, he talks about his interest in not having this debt, for instance. So this is kind of a religious cultural orientation that this particular individual brought up with. So this inner conversation is a kind of a outcome of the context these people live in. So the way they reflect on the cultural situation. So in that sense, culture is being there because you're trying to understand the deeper focus of agency. So because this is a kind of a meta concept, it could be used in any context. I think Fabio already mentioned that Brazilian family directors probably would have the similar kind of, but they may not act, because this is interesting. The strength of this concept is that this reflexive pattern could be different in a different context, because this individual will respond to the context they find themselves in. So yes, definitely, if you take this approach, in Brazil or in other countries, should be useful. I hope that I managed to answer your question. Got another question from Danielle, the same person, I think. How do the characteristics such as the presence of multiple generations simultaneously on the board, the type of family bonds of these board members, father, son, cousin, and other concentration, dispersion, right, might have influenced your findings? So in our case, as I said, we're more interested in, so for example, we're more interested in the life projects, life stories, and how they're sort of reacting to the situation. But we also saw how this conflict between, for example, son versus daughter kind of situation, we found that it's in our paper, actually. So when these regulatory demands came through, some of those companies or some of those family directors sort of started an internal code of conduct, because for them it became very more important now to protect, to preserve this family bonding. So they wanted to get rid of, say, some rogue, bad family members. So, and keep the good family members in the inner circle. So they created that inner circle, and that within the inner circle, some family members are not included, but some trusted managers were included. So hence the necessity of internal code of conduct. So this is in response to the intervention coming from the outside, because they are now pushing for independent directors. So they felt there is a need even more now to protect their business. So in that sense, this has manifested in our findings. I hope that answered your question, Daniel. So let me, okay, so there is a question, next question in Portuguese. So Fabio, is Eduardo Lavada.
This is the one I mentioned to you before.
Oh, okay, you already said that.
English.
Okay. Okay,
Ahead.
so next question is Tassiani. So question here is that in your paper you present the Archer's social and performance concern constructing the agency level family member. I would like to ask how I see myself, how I respond to my concerns, social concern, but also to other concern in the face of corporate. I would like to hear about the reflexive process response. Yeah, so this is a, I think, good question. This is so it's not about when I say, so there is what Archer said, there's a primary concerns. Everybody has their primary concern of their life. So it could be, if your primary concern is to protect, for instance, to be a good father or good mother, then if this is your primary concern, then all other concerns came secondary. So if you're a family director, main concern is, this is what I want to be. I want to be a religious person, or this and that. All other concern came secondary. So sometimes at the cost of the company. So at the cost of their economic interest, they will be driven towards their primary concern. So to respond to the reforms, how they respond to the reforms, it is driven by what kind of primary concerns of these individuals might have. So that's the, I think the good point of this kind of work is that not all family directors will respond exactly the same way because they have a different primary concerns. Some family directors are religious, some are not. So they will respond differently to this different kind of situation. Yeah, so hence Archers, which I didn't talk about in the paper, I don't know whether I have time, there is a different kind of, in our case, we found these family directors are communicative reflexive, but Archers talks about few other reflexive patterns, for instance, matter reflexive, passive reflexive. Some people don't care. So for example, I don't care about the reforms, this is not, I just follow whatever other people say. So people might have a different kind of reflexive patterns. So again, depends on the context and the primary concern they find themselves in. So I would definitely, Tassiani would like you to contact me later on. I'll send you the articles that explain more theoretically of this Archer's work. It would be very useful. Thank you. Do you have time? Because I can see a lot of other questions here. So
Sure.
Okay, so next question is about your data. Do you have information about how long the investigate companies are PLCs? How does the interviewers experience the transition to become PLC? Do you think this could give a new perspective as you're using reflexive view? I think it's a good question again. So because we're calling it family PLC, so these businesses didn't start as PLC. They started as a family business. Then they transformed into PLC. So they listed their shares onto the stock exchange. So they never, I think it's quite a good question, is because they never really see, even though listed on the PLC stock exchange, they never see this is a PLC. They always see this as a kind of family business. So the listing on the PLC is trying to get in the equity from other people. So, or to expand the business. As I said, in some cases, people don't want bank loan, they rather want more equity, so they listed themselves into the stock exchange. So definitely our interview suggested that this particular set of family directors have gone through those transformation and never really gave up this family control. So that could well be a different kind of scenario where that the business start as PLC, but there could be a dominant shareholders that emerges after that. There will be a different kind of response. I'm sure of that. But again, that again tells us to go and study these life story, life projects, reflexive patterns of this individual. This is quite an important. That's why we're suggesting this kind of methodological guidelines to research. And it's a very difficult one. It's not easy to interview this important individual and spending time with them. So we have to spend long time with these particular family directors, and also read about them in the newspaper. So it's not just talking to them, it's also talking to somebody else about them. So there's another kind of methodological IPA. So I'm not discussing that today, but this is we have followed in our research. Okay, thank you. I hope that answer your question. Now, Claudio. Okay, Claudio. Great. How do you classify your research critical? If so, how can one connect the concept with the overall aim of the critical research focus on individual emancipation? Yeah, I think it's a good question. So this particular type of reflexivity we find in our case is communicative reflexivity, that people wanted to have this kind of same context to continue. But I think this is the whole purpose of reflexivity idea, is to demonstrate that agents as an individual have power to do things, to change things. Margaret Archer, for instance, talks about meta-reflexive individual, that who changes things, who can change things, because they want to disrupt the continuity. So this is firmly rooted in the critical agenda. So it's a kind of Margaret Archer's project to tell the reader, look, there are individuals who may be passive reflexive, that may not be able to see the change or manage to do the change, but there are other people will see the change, can do the change because of different kind of reflexive patterns that people comes from the interactions from the context. So yes, good question, Claudio, again. Thank you. Okay, so we've got another question here. I don't know. So perhaps Fabio.
The first one is provided by Professor Arthur Roberto Nascimento. And he congratulates you for the speech that is very rich issue that provides some insights for his research. So is congratulations for the contents and this speech. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I think we don't have any other question. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'd like to thank you again. I think that the opportunity to have one approach like this, thinking about ontologically and epistemologically, the way they provide is very important, because you must combine things and treat things that in other perspectives are not treated and never appear. And is a way to understand the world and provide solutions, or at least paper. That one day we expected that we move the world and make people happy. That is our expectation. I'd like to thank you and tell you that in some moments I counted the people that joined this room, and in some moments you got something like 147 people attending for this speech. That is a reason that is a very successful opportunity for us. Thank you very much, and we'd like to provide the opportunity that we could receive you not only by internet, but provide at least a coffee, a lunch, and the Brazilian relationships that for now that is cold, but is hot. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Fabio, and it's a really good opportunity for me as well. As you said, I managed to speak to people, although not physically, but I can see that number of people attended, which is good for me. And I hope at some point I will get out of this country and meet you guys in Brazil, or whatever the temperature is. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Muito obrigado, pessoal. Pessoal, muito obrigado, hein? Uma boa tarde a todos.